Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. I always think about how being able to speak and being heard, it's really a privilege. Attention is such an important form of love. So I'm very grateful to have your presence here. And I will walk you through aspects of transactional analysis. So a little bit, I can see some faces here, some people who know what transactional analysis is about, but there are also people who may not know. Can I just have a show of hands, with your reaction button? Who knows what is transactional analysis? If you can just give me a show of hands. And what I don't, okay, I can see some do, okay. And there are some that, okay. So it looks like maybe it's a little bit of 50-50. Okay, various people. Okay, thank you. So, well, transactional analysis isn't about speculating on the stock market, but it's a form of social psychology. And it's a form of social psychology that was developed by a Canadian psychiatrist in the 50s of the last century. Now, the brilliant thing about TA, that's the shortened version, is that you can really stop communication and look at social transactions. So what is it that we are exchanging? What is it that's happening between us? And those exchanges are between different parts of us, which are called ego states. So we all have a part that's a parent, which is the voice of our parents that we internalize and take on board. We've got an adult part, which is our capacity to be fully present in the here and now. And there's also our child, so the little kid inside you that needs love and discipline at the same time. Yeah. So what's really helpful is that TA is a set of maps, and they help us to recognize patterns. And the biggest denominator in my work is I tend to work with quite diverse people. So it can be anyone who's, Guatemalan indigenous. It may be someone who's Mexican, who's living in Paris. It may be a Polish person who lives in London, or it may be a woman in India who's going through a divorce. Yeah. So TA has got really interesting applications. And so far, I must say, it does work pretty well cross-culturally. And yet it's still a Western system. Yeah. So this is one frame. I was introduced with all the letters and the things that I have done in my life. Yeah. In certain cultures, this isn't particularly relevant. It's about who I am and how I relate to you. So this is one frame that we're already introducing. We're already creating a culture, by the first transactions, if you like, that set the tone. Okay, and why do I do what I do? Well, what's the reason behind that? In one of the workshops that one of my colleagues was leading, one of the participants said this phrase, "There is no home." And for many people around the world who are somewhat intercultural, either through choice or it may be forced, a lot of people are looking for their home. And you don't necessarily have to be an intercultural individual to be looking for your home, although it gets pretty challenging when you're in between the mix of cultures and languages. If you ever lived abroad or identify yourself, aspects of you as intercultural, have you ever struggled to find your home within yourself? Can I have a show of hands? Just put your hand up if you ever struggled with, so quite readily, some hands, yeah? You see, it is an experience that we share. What does it mean to find your home? So that's the reason, because we tend to choose problems that are particularly problematic for us, okay? Yeah, we have specific interests. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and introduce you to what we're going to do and how we're going to do that. Okay, so that's as the introduction. I've put a map of the world over here and I flipped it a little bit because we are used to particular versions of reality. or the dominant frame of reference that we're going to talk about. So I just flipped it, and I just want you to notice your reaction. Do you feel curious? Do you feel comfort, discomfort? Is it weird? Do you recognize this picture? Yeah? Just goes to show how our perceptions work through habits. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. You will gain awareness of your frame of reference and how it impacts your cross-cultural position. That's the aim of that. Now, how are we going to do that? You see, what we like to do in transactional analysis, we like to contract. So it's an agreement that's bilateral, that works both ways. So what I propose is this, to go through presence, to be present in the here and now. I mean, I understand if you're doing something else and cooking your lunch, that's fine too. You know, it happens to me to be in webinars. And if you can give your attention to this process, I would be very grateful. I also invite you into a sense of curiosity and tolerance. There may be different points of view. And for me, that's the most challenging and most important piece about intercultural work is how do we tolerate what's different from our point of view. Also that we can have a sense of care and challenge. You're going to be in breakout rooms for some time. So how can we care for each other and also disagree? You can interrupt if you need to, if you have questions. It is an interactive session. There will be breakout rooms and an open floor discussion. And to be honest, what I'm looking for is a balance of our discussion and our contact and getting through. You know, there's nothing worse than just going through and wanting to tick things off the list. And this webinar will be recorded. So if you don't want to feature in the recording, then it may be difficult for you to, speak. Yeah. So don't speak if you don't want to be recorded. Yeah. I hope that you feel comfortable with that. So let me just stop that for a moment and then check with you. Is this okay as an agreement? And you see, this is the moment where people get adapted. Yeah. Because it's really an agreement between us. So you can add something to it. And I welcome your voice. Maybe you think, well, maybe something's missing here. It's not about me imposing that. So let's just take a moment to see, are you okay with the way how we're going to work? Is this okay? I can see some nods. Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you. Siad Zafar, that was thank you so much from Houston. Yeah. Nanette, Richard, thank you. Taz, okay. So if there's anything that you want to add throughout this webinar, you can also put your hand up and say, well, actually, can we take this into consideration? Okay, it's an agreement that goes both ways. Okay, so let me just look I'm going to share with you the agenda of what we're going to do, and we'll move into an exercise. So we have an exercise in a moment and breakout rooms. I will walk you through this idea of a frame of reference and share some theory. We're going to have an open floor discussion. Then we'll go into cross-cultural positions and have a summary. So that's the main plan. Just stop sharing that. So here we are, set up to explore what is a frame of reference. I will share with you an exercise introduced by one of my teachers, Rosemary Napper, who works quite cross-culturally. So all of us have a system of perception, okay? And that system of perception varies, of course, depending on your place of birth, your nationality, where you moved. So it's a particular perspective, okay? It's a frame. And as you are growing, you may be moving from one country to another. Your frame is getting wider. Yeah, so you can see more. And I think of that reality is so complex. All of us probably could make a hole in a different area of this paper. And, when you do this in a group situation, you put the papers and you overlap them. And what you see, there's a tiny, tiny little area that overlaps. It's just a physical exercise. But think about it. How much do we really share? How different are our perceptions? So here we are. If we are lucky and we are choosing to move somewhere away, Or maybe we are forced through economic migration and various things. Our area is becoming bigger and bigger. We have more experiences. And there comes a time when you're challenged even more and you keep growing. So what happens at some point is that, well, you've learned a great deal about the world. So this is your open frame. Now there's a trick, because what happens is, after you learn so much and expand yourself, you lose the coherent sense of self. Have you ever felt disoriented in another culture? Has it been your experience when, changing languages? Maybe your partner is from a different culture. Maybe you were challenged by some of your clients, yeah? So the whole idea in intercultural work is, how do we expand this frame, but we don't do it too much? I mean, I could rip it apart, and this probably would be some equivalent to, some sort of psychotic breakdown. Okay, so what I would like you to do is to take a pen into your non-dominant hand at the moment. So if you're right-handed, please take it into your left hand, okay? And what I would like you to do, I've got a little board here. Someone said, after a while, you feel like you're not belonging anywhere as you transition from one culture into another. Yeah, thank you, Ansa. Yeah. And that's the problem. And we need a lot of resources. We need a lot of compassion, and we need a lot of awareness so that we can stay centered. So while you're having your pen in your non-dominant hand, I want you to write down these words. My culture is like, and finish the sentence. So I'm just writing over here with my non-dominant hand. It's supposed to be wonky. Culture, oh God, is like, and you can choose the culture that you belong to, your culture of origin, is like a cat. That's what came to my mind. My culture is like a cat. This is what I did in my exercise. So please finish this. My culture is like a plant. Oh, thank you. Yeah, please share. My culture is like water. Yola, I couldn't read that because it was a bit blurry. Magdalena, my culture is like home on something. Can't read that. Okay. So you're getting some ideas. What I would like you to do is to put these words in the chat. Okay. So just one word that you've written with your non-dominant hand. Okay. So I'm going to start and I'm going to put lovely. I'll put cat. There we go. So once you've written them down, we're going to send you off to breakout rooms, okay? And the very specific question that I'm going to have for you, let me just put this here. There we go. Let me share my screen to give you this. Yeah. So go into your breakout room and talk about your association with your culture. What do you notice about the acceptance of self and others in your associations? Okay, so you're going to go into breakout rooms. Let's put around 3 people into a breakout room, and you're going to have 10 minutes to talk about that. Okay, is it clear as to what you need to do, what the task is? Okay, thank you, Rina. Very interactive. I appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so can we send people off to breakout rooms? Though, welcome back. I can see some people that made it in the last minute. Yes, welcome back. Okay, so would anyone like to share what came up in your discussion in your breakout room? What were the associations around the acceptance of self and other? Yeah, I can see the gentleman's. Yeah, yes, please let us know.
For me, I kept thinking why the word plant came to my head. I think my primary association with plant is that it grows. I cannot have a fixed 100% fixed self, 100% fixed culture. Everything is continuously changing and growing. So I learn and myself continue to be changed based on where I am in my life and what I have learned. I grew up in Pakistan first 20 years. I lived in Saudi Arabia for the next 4 years, and now I've been in the United States for a long time, turning 66 last month. So that gives me a lot more perspective, and I feel I cannot say I have American culture or Pakistani culture or Saudi culture. I have certain things that I have picked and choose, which continue to evolve and change as well.
Yeah, thank you, Siet. And I imagine the amount of work and the reflection behind all these changes that you lived through. Yeah, thank you. Who else would like to share their impression? Yeah, is that it?
Yeah, I can share them because I guess I was inspired by our conversation. We were like in the Polish group, so we were among Polish people, and we had like interesting, I guess, conversation about, like Yola said, that is there something like one culture actually, right? So even if we are like Polish speakers, like among we talk about Polish culture, but it's not like one culture, because within this culture there are many cultures. So I think that's also nice to remember.
Thank
the
you.
diversity within.
Yeah. So look, we've got themes around pluralism. We've got themes, with the constancy and change around the plant. So it's already set in frames of how we understand our cultural self. Okay. So anybody else would like to contribute? And dying to speak? Okay.
Yeah, if I may say some words, because it was very interesting in our room, Spanish-speaking room, two Polish, one person, Spanish speaker. It was very interesting what you have mentioned, Piotr, about the metaphor we have chosen has also some dark side. So we should look at it. What is the dark side of this, what we have chosen? We have reflected on that, and I think it's very important. And commonly we say that worthy to deep our consciousness about it.
Yeah. Well, one way of thinking about culture is looking at the metaphor that comes up and connecting it to the shadow. So, Siet, if I can use that metaphor of the plant, for instance, so the shadow of the plant would be, an animal can go anywhere, but a plant is attached to the ground. So what does it say about changeability? But then if I choose an animal, the animal can run away. It's not constant. So it implies towards a very fluid identity. Yeah. So digging into the metaphors can give us a clue. Okay. So I'm going to walk you through some ideas around transactional analysis. You're starting to build some awareness of your frame of reference. Okay. So let's go here. Right. So this is my frame of reference, that piece, that frame, that structure that determines how I'm going to see the world. And within that frame, I have my ego state, so my part of personality. I have got my parent, so it is how I took on board the voice of my parents and my culture within its traditions, with its assumptions about the distribution of wealth, for example, and also the character. So what are the implicit messages of what we consider good or bad? So for instance, in the Western society, you would implicitly think that my value comes from working. Yeah, there's a particular frame. I also have got the adult ego state, which is about how do I frame thinking? And the thinking can be holistic, it can be analytical, it can be long-term, it can be short-term. Now, as you look into the literature in transactional analysis, they say, well, actually, that adult aspect of thinking is the least investigated. Yeah, so we're like that proverbial fish in the water that just swims without awareness of being around in the water. In the same way, we don't necessarily question the assumptions that lie behind thinking. And finally, I've got my child self. So this is about all those sensory and visceral sensations. Yeah, so you might have some memories from your childhood, the smell of bread from a bakery, or if you're Italian, you might remember some pasta, or maybe a tortilla in you if you're in Central America. Yeah, we've got those sensations that are, like inscribed in the body. So for instance, swearing is a good example. If you swear in a foreign language, you may not feel it as much. But if you were to say it in your first language, there comes a certain charge that's in the body. Yeah. So these sensations come in the child self. So this is the frame of reference, that filter that will determine my perception. It can be like this, or like this. And we all have got those different filters. So we look at the world through a frame of reference, and it's like a pair of glasses, and it organizes your perception. Now, the very definition of this concept comes from the Schiffs, who worked in the 70s, and they defined it as a structure. So what comes in gets structure. There's some structure of different responses, and it comes out. And that structure is like the skin around my ego states. Yeah. And it helps me to know who I am. Yeah. So it gives me that, perceptual, conceptual, affective, and action set. So I can define self, others, and the world, both structurally and dynamically. So this is the definition for the nerds. Some of you who are a bit nerdy like I am, I love those kind of definitions. But really what it means, what to perceive, because we ignore certain stimuli and we choose those ones that are significant to us. We feel certain things in response and we act in a particular way, which creates our sense of self. Siad, you've got a question?
Yeah, I'm taking liberty. You mentioned anytime we have any questions, we can talk. So in intercultural communication, we call that perception. What is the difference between the perception that we use in intercultural communication, which everything you describe appears to be the same for frame of reference?
Yeah, it's a specific concept from transactional analysis, which is about, it was used in working with people who had severe mental illness. And the idea was that frame wasn't functional. And that frame is taught by the parent self. And that parent self will give us either functional or dysfunctional beliefs and ways of functioning. Yeah. So by confronting a frame that is pathological, so here in the original idea, it was pathological. We propose a frame that comes from the therapist that is the healthy one. That's the difference.
Okay, I noticed in the definition, it does say individual with an overall perceptual, conceptual, affective, and action set, which is used to define the self, other people, and the world. So I'm still having a difficult time separating this concept from the perception in intercultural communication.
Yeah.
This is more attached to psychology because it's trying to take care of mental illnesses. Please go on.
Okay, yeah. You would see that, looking at the paper specifically and how those methods are applied to treat patients, yeah? Okay, so let's look at what happens with your frame of reference when you go to a new culture. You can either confront, so you come and you butt heads with the new culture, you will question everything that's there, or you go into complaining about how things are bad, going a little bit into a victim position, or you conform. But I'm talking about conforming in the sense where there is interchange of ideas, where we can co-create a shared frame of reference. So ideas get mixed, and we are able to enter a space of intersubjectivity. Now, this is bloody difficult. Yeah, it looks like, we've got some question marks going between people. It requires. So even right now, Siet and myself, we are trying to see what would be our shared understanding of that concept. And already there is a sense that we have got different points of view because they come from different disciplines. Okay? So that is a process that's ongoing and requires patience. Now, let's look into more details of how a frame of reference is understood by the shifts. So essentially, you cannot get outside of your frame of reference. It's in the same ways as Einstein said. You cannot solve a problem with the mind that's created. You need to somehow expand it through stimulation. And parents are the main transmitters of the frame of reference. They teach us the ropes of the culture. As we grow up, what happens is that culture itself becomes what we take on board. So it's not just the parents, but culture itself becomes part of our frame of reference. And that will help us to define life options. So for instance, before COVID, we didn't consider working on Zoom as much. Today, this life option seems to be pretty viable. Also, it defines our structure thinking. So as I said, is it long-term thinking or is it short-term thinking? I remember once going through Lake Atitlan. It's a beautiful lake that's here in Guatemala. And we're going through the lake, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the lake, we're running out of fuel. And that didn't seem to be a problem for anyone. My thinking personally would be to make sure that I add the fuel, so I'm not stopping in the middle of the bloody lake, okay? For someone, this wasn't, existing in the frame of reference. Also, our frame will determine how we solve problems. So I was involved in some research around looking at teacher passivity. What are passive behaviors for educators? We looked at Ukraine, Poland, the UK, and Guatemala. Now, from what came out from our research was that Guatemala had the least passive behaviors amongst all those countries. And I just thought this is really surprising because as I was training teachers in Guatemala, I realized some of them, in my view, seem to be passive. So for instance, they had to complete portfolios and they would make spelling mistakes. They wouldn't particularly look at their work. Now, the conclusion we had in our research is that for passivity to take place, there has to be a definition of a problem situation. What I consider to be a problem doesn't seem to be a problem for someone else. And I was saying to these teachers, hey, I am Polish and I'm correcting your spelling in Spanish. Maybe you could work a bit harder on that, yeah? So again, that defines our problem-solving strategies and the very definition of what is a problem. Also, part of our frame of reference is about closeness and intimacy. So how we define our intimate life. So some cultures may be more collectivistic, where it's about integration into groups. Some of them may be more individualistic. I remember cycling through my little town over here around Antigua in Guatemala, and there was a man who was picking up rubbish, and I was there cycling on my bicycle, and at one point, the man just looked at me, and I was looking at him. There was this moment when we looked at each other, and he smiled with the most genuine, beautiful smile. I had a sense like the universe just stopped for a few seconds. Okay, so how we express ourselves effectively and what closeness means, that is also dictated by the frame of reference. In order for our communication to make sense, we need a shared area. So I'm thinking of an example when I was working in an international school. We had 10 different nationalities in our classroom. Oh, those kids love to talk. We didn't have a shared area around, what it would mean to listen to each other and take turn. And it was pretty chaotic. And I asked these teenagers 3 questions. What is the value that you place on your own words? Second question, what is the value that you place on the words of others? Question number 3, Is there anything you would like to change? Okay, so we're building a shared area, shared understanding of what it means to communicate. And our frame of reference is imposed in manipulation. So we have to agree to the definition of reality that's provided by someone else. But as I was reflecting on this a bit, I was wondering as well, today we live in a time of disinformation. What happens actually, we live in a place where there is disintegration to our frames of reference. It's hard to make sense of what's happening. We cannot even agree to what is a fact. We live in a time of post-truth. So sometimes manipulation may be actually confusion. I think it was Hannah Arendt, that political philosopher, who was talking about conditions necessary for thinking. And she said, if you want to manipulate a society, make sure that they're busy with trivia, with trial. And I thought that's really useful, we're scrolling on our phones. A lot of it is, they really need to see another video of a cat or another vegan recipe. How much noise is created these days? That's the frame of reference. So let's go a bit further. How can we change frames of reference? And what would that entail? So this is a piece of theory of Jean Ilsley-Clark, that is a transactional analysis educator, a very sweet lady. I met her at a workshop when she was, I think, 95. She was writing something on the board with her hand shaking a little bit. And she gave me a very good piece of advice that I use until today. She said, if it takes less than 3 minutes, do it now. But of course, that is also a frame, because what happens in that, there is an assumption that productivity is important, okay? So these are the different areas and the expansion of my frame. So this is the open area. Do you remember what I had at the beginning? Then there's light influence over there. So when you have a conversation with someone, you might read a book. There's also the medium influence, which may be things like, for instance, therapy, or in meaningful friendship, or something that really impacted you, a very important trip. And then we've got the area of deep influence. And in that deep influence, there are all sorts of things happening. And within that deep influence, there's the cultural change. That's how culture, how deeply it is ingrained in us. And it's also linked to philosophy. So what is the frame that decides, that defines reality? There's also technology. So as I speaking about phones and how they determine our frame, and also economy, ideas around the distribution of wealth. What I find interesting is quite often things like philosophy or culture, we get very fiery about these topics. There's certain parental quality. I'm right, you wrong. Yeah. That is a bit of a clue where that is coming from. So we've got elements here such as religion, geography. For instance, the geography of my country, of Poland, it's very much, in between, East and West, if you like. Yeah, we've got all sorts of social, geopolitical influences there. There's also history. What are the forces of history that determine our point of view? Our belonging to community that has changed with Zoom following the pandemic. I live quite far away in relation to Europe. Yeah, my Eurocentrism just came out. You see what I noticed to be far away. And by being able to connect to you, and many people connect online, we can create a community. It's also our ethnicity that dictates our frame of reference. The decade, whether it's the roaring 80s or our current decade, where we know in terms of climate change, we are the generation, we need to pull our socks up. We know that we face significant challenges in this area of climate change. If we don't do much about that, we will really be in a bad place. There's also gender. We know things are changing about women's rights. And there is lots of work to do, especially here in Latin America. Sexuality. So for instance, I am gay. Being gay was considered a disease back in the 70s, you know, so things like that do change and our frame of reference is different. Our physical health, our physical possibilities, our self-concept changes with illness. Also birth order. Quite often people who are the first, the eldest, would assume certain responsibilities. And I have examples of various clients who were struggling with this. And also experiences in utero. And just a side note, when I speak about my clients, I tend to change gender. You know, my clients are not an anecdote. This is speaking from deep respect. These are people's lives, you know. So one of my clients, when they were in the womb, the mother was attacked and nearly killed. So you can imagine the amount of cortisol and the amount of stress that it creates and how that translates into here and now anxiety and a sense of insecurity in the world. You know? So just notice how rich and difficult to change are some of these aspects of the frame of reference. So we are in a particular frame that's dominant. So I'm going to share with you, oh yeah, we also have got talents. But I want to talk to you about this. I found this piece of research by an academic called Joseph Henrich, and he coined this term weird societies, which stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. And I thought, this is really interesting. Oh. And what he says in his research is that 96% of all participants in experiments in psychology come from Western societies. So in a way, this is very much overrepresented. We generalize from a Western frame from particular countries, and we make this to be the truth, as it were. Now, we're not talking here about, setting up a dichotomy that there are weird societies and non-weird societies, a whole continuum. But what happens is, I think reading his paper, I looked, what was it like? Those 96, percent of participants, they account for 12% of the population, I think. Yeah, so we're generalizing very much something. And we are privileging a particular point of view. Now, when I look at weird societies and non-weird societies, I want to share this little example with you. So once I went on a hike with my husband, and we were walking through the forest and so on, and we got attacked by a swarm of bees, and we're just like running away. It was really scary. All these bees, and we were running away. And then I went for a massage to an indigenous spiritual sort of massage healer. And I'm recounting the story about these bees. And she just looked at me and she said, "Did you ask for permission to the forest?" Okay. And of course, we can dismiss this as some sort of hippie stuff and if we put that in the context of climate emergency, what would that really mean to adopt a frame of reference that the Earth is a sentient being? If I relate to the Earth with a sense of reverence, if it is not a mechanical object, it is a being that feels. So that's one of the biggest differences between non-weird societies and weird societies. Those non-Western societies see very much themselves as interconnected, as part, connected to nature, where collectivism is important and relationships. Weird societies, on the other hand, tend to be individualistic. They tend to focus on achievement. They are driven by certain individual feelings and aspirations. Yeah, so you can have a look at those properties of societies that are weird and non-weird. And I'm talking about this because there's a particular frame that gets promoted globally. And Lydia was talking about, how do we invite pluralism? How do we invite many points of view? Talking about that, I found a very interesting indigenous thinker, a lady called Lorena Cabnal, and she talks about our connection to the earth, and especially she talks about community feminism and how our bodies are really intertwined with the land. And one of her theses is, as long as we have a power relationship with the earth, so a relationship of dominance, we're really up for trouble. It needs to be a relationship of interconnectedness. And I think that's something that in the Western world we have lost. We don't see that as significant. Okay, I'm going to stop that for a few minutes to see if there are any comments. I've got one more piece, which is about cross-cultural positions. I'll stop that. And I'm curious to hear from you if you have any comments, observations, what's resonating with you. How do these ideas could impact your worldview, your practice? I can see everyone is engrossed. Yeah.
I'll go first. I'm really impacted by what you shared of the 96% of the research coming from these weird societies. Having done my literature review recently, it was mind-blowing to see how little representation there was of any other culture. Yeah, that's what I'm sitting with, is the lack of difference in opinion and the wisdom from the land and everything else, which seems quite normal to me because I was just nodding my head as you were saying the relationship from the earth and seeking permission to do stuff. That is very accepted in my frame of reference, whereas it will seem really alien to somebody else if I said that, and how those things are very significant and also not accounted for. And I'm sitting with a sense of sadness, actually, that they're not accounted for. So I just want to put my sadness out there in the circle.
Thank you. So I hear your sadness. And I also wonder, how is you being impacted, how that can be a gift to yourself and others?
I think the awareness is always a little seed to grow and expand, and to learn, and just to learn and expand. I'm going to mute myself because my dog's just walked in, so he can bark any second now.
There we go. That's a frame trip. Okay, we've got it. Even the dogs want to get included, and that's what we would call a synchronicity. Yeah. Anybody else?
Yes. Thank you, Piotr, very much for what happened, for what you shared, and for the exercises. I am staying with this. I find it a bit paradoxical because I am aware of the limitations, intrinsic in any frame of reference, and also I'm thinking about the richness, and I had also this idea, the research, the scientific method is so very much part of the Western culture. So it's like we are looking through the world in Western societies through this type of culture in which we do research. We have an academia, we have papers, we have journals, we have philosophical systems, we have anthropology, psychology, and I think there are different types of culture, and maybe in which this way of being in the world, or this way of looking at the world is very much different. And maybe it is a cultural imperialism, or it is this tendency of the Western culture to colonize or to replicate or other cultures. I mean, I think globally there are very interesting and dynamic processes and cultural exchanges, and we kind of inform each other or we don't inform each other. We kind of preserve each other. So it's all very complex and interesting. So this is what I can share for now.
Thank you, Irina. So you're speaking to something very important, which is how do we hold pluralism and the confusion or inner split that it can produce. Yeah. And that some cultures seem to be taking the position they are more correct than others because they have certain resources and ways of thinking. But before we know it, we're probably going to be swimming in our own sewage, in the Western developed world. And we are turning towards various systems of wisdom that can teach us. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, I have seen also Professor Carlos.
Yes, please.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I was sharing with Yorinda earlier on how little we know about really ourselves, meaning about our the word structure is a little bit uncomfortable for me because I use system analysis, and one of my scientific contribution is called Systema Sapien. And Systema Sapien is a cosmo-plurivision that all the organism from our cell system, membrane system, gene system, neurosystem, lacrimal system, intestine system, all the systems are all integrated, they're all interconnected. So our biology, our knowledge of our biology is completely erased from a deep understanding. So the concept of self-awareness is already starting from a very superficial level. And the whole, so for me, the word culture is also very, I accept it because I have to kind of accept a lot of concept. But it's a systema, it's a system. So when you're talking about Western societies and non-Western society, is a whole system. They are not separated, they are integrated. Now, in that process of integration, the issue is to understand if they are really connected in terms of a quality connection or is an abusive connection, yes, meaning of the lowest quality you can imagine, yes. And so from that perspective, when I was looking at the issue of framing, I actually put here no frame, and in the sense that already this kind of thinking, which is a belief system, this belief system is already loaded with the frames.
Yeah.
I remember because I have this conversation in Italy for SIETAR Italy in 2017. And I told George Simmons, because he used the same concept of the frame. And I said, I'm going to be really very controversial. What about smashing the frames? I'm not going to say that we should smash the frame that you are mentioning, but I think the starting point of really becoming aware, I think you need to become aware of your own biology of beliefs. And if you don't really get into that, you never will reach all the dimensions and all the understanding to get to the next level, which is consciousness, and to even get even much deeper than that. You've been exposed in Guatemala. I work as a professor in Mexico. In San Cristobal, I was sharing with Jorin there. And from this kind of perspective, the ancestral science have been completely removed, invalidated, not recognized. And I think what it was sad to hear from Rup is that she is very sad and very disappointed. And I said to Rup, please don't, because our voice is coming. Our voice has been silenced for nearly 6,000 years, but we are coming back in the wheel of power. I will just tell you some more another time about the wheel of power.
Yeah.
They've been controlling the wheel of power. Our wheel of power, Rup, is coming. We need to work together to get our voice back as our ancestors did. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's interesting when you speak about it, as I was reading some works about Lorena Cabnal, she uses the word in Spanish, cuerpos cosmosintientes, bodies that are cosmic sensing. So I think there are various ideas, and how do we bring them and account for them? Yeah. Thank you, Agnes. And then we're going to move to the last bit. Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you for sharing and stirring a lot of thoughts. Actually, I will just share a quick how do I call it? A quick insight, maybe, that while we discussed in the breakout rooms, and then when you heard some theory, actually, I thought that something that we often make is imposing our frames on other people. And it made me think about the times when I lived in cultures that were very much different to my home country culture. And it was probably the most difficult thing when people from those countries were imposing their frames on me. And kind of like I couldn't fit into that, and I couldn't even understand well those frames, especially in the early stages, what they think of me and what they expect of me. And I believe that it's this having a deep awareness of our own frames, and just knowing that we need to pause at some moment when we meet people who are different than us, and just make sure that we don't arbitrarily impose our frames on them. This is something that actually has been my reflection, and thank you for this food for thought.
Thank you, Agnes. Yeah. And how do we keep that awareness? Because sometimes we still impose outside of the awareness. You know, I sometimes speak to my husband about something, and he said to me, "You want me to respond like a white person?" You know, he said that to me. Yeah, so it's the little assumptions that we bring and what we think is their frame, but there are frames. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes. I'm going to share with you the last piece around cross-cultural positions. So how these different frames can mix up. So here we are. It's our weird societies. Oh yeah, I also wanted to show you this. It's very interesting that this illusion, the Muller-Lyer illusion, this is not seen by hunter-gatherer populations. It is illusion that, you know, is seen people mainly in Western societies. Yeah, I mean, I imagine most of you see that, you know, there's an illusion of the bottom segment being bigger. Yeah, so that's how perceptually we can go into various places. Okay, we had our open floor discussion. Now, what do we understand as okayness specifically in transactional analysis is that sense of dignity. It's what you actually, Agnes, what you said, you know, okayness would be this idea that every frame has value, yeah, intrinsic value and dignity. That's the importance. This is how we frame okayness in transactional analysis. And here's a question, you know, how do we find okayness within ourselves? Because that's a challenge. A lot of us work, you know, emotionally, cognitively to have self-acceptance. And sometimes our culture helps us, sometimes it works against us. Okay. Now let's look at how that might work in between cultures. So I can consider that my culture is okay or it is not okay. So either it has value, intrinsically it is valuable, or it is rubbish. I don't feel that it has value. So it's a continuum. Also, I can consider that your culture is okay, so it has intrinsic value, or your culture is not okay, yeah? So for instance, how would I hold in mind? Even because it's structuralist thinking, you are referring, Carlos, to this idea, even introducing an idea of a frame is a frame. Yeah, so I'm already imposing a way of thinking here, yeah? And is it okay or not? So from this, we can have different combinations in the position we're not okay, they are okay. We're not okay, they're not okay. We're okay if they're not okay. And over here, we're okay, they're okay. So this is a spin of a TA concept called the okay chorale, which shows us how we assign value relatively to ourselves and others. And this is about level of culture. So starting here, we're in a world-minded position where I can hold multiple frames. And gosh, this is easier said than done, okay? Just to be very, very clear, this is what I learn every day. Here we're in the xenophilic position. We are less than others. So I'm thinking about back in the 90s in Poland, you know, the dust of communism still didn't, you know, get finally cleared. We used to have this fantasy that all the German products were fantastic. Until these days, you've got those shops that say, you know, German cleaning products, you know? So this is an example of a xenophilic position or an idea where you think what is external is better, yeah? Those of us who grew up behind the Iron Curtain can see, you know, that fascination with America, of what we project, you know, the land of opportunities, you know? So that's the xenophilic position. Here is the misanthropic position. And I can refer to that as I was providing some group counseling for Indigenous women who were victims of domestic violence. And it's that sense of being let down by humanity, where your culture is not okay because it doesn't protect you. You may or may not know there was a genocide in Guatemala. 200,000 people were exterminated, really. You know, people were killed by machetes. So the aftermath of that genocide is still present among people. I don't blame people like that, you know, that they go into that misanthropic position. You know, they were let down by other cultures. Alternatively, we can have xenophobia. We're okay. You know, we are fantastic. We are virtuous. They're coming over and stealing our jobs. Yeah. So we've got these four positions. And I just will walk you through these. Okay. So that position, that xenophilic, yeah, misanthropic, yeah, it's that hatred really that comes from a bad response. You know, if I also consider Afghanistan, you know, we let this country down as a global community. Yeah. The frame of reference is lost because it doesn't allow you to make sense of your experiences. And here are the attributes of this frame, yeah, the distrust of humankind, the stuckness and sadness, yeah, and the sense that there is no hope. Then again, we've got that xenophobic position, yeah, this attitude, you know, I'm right, you're wrong, yeah. I'm thinking here about, you know, some of the words that Donald Trump would use. Yeah, he would say, people are coming to these shithole countries. Yeah, that's what he would refer to. Yeah, so there's a single frame of reference, my way or the highway. And the attributes around others being inferior, we are superior. So the other is an unreal other, yeah, which comes from ignorance and the blame of other cultures and anger. And then that position, that xenophilic position, which is that hatred towards self, if you like, where there's a distorted frame of reference that distorts my perception. And the attributes is about idealizing the other culture. I mean, I remember occupying this position back in the 90s, when we would go to Western Europe and we would feel like, Poland was like really uncivilized and whatnot. We had these ideas of all the development happening in the West. And of course, as I gained more experience, I just realized, there are certain things. We're a pretty well-educated nation. We have discipline, we have got work culture. There are certain things about my nation that are pretty good. So that was my shallow and limited experience. And then finally, in an ideal world, this is just a model. It's not really like that. But the attitude is about cooperation. And it's being able to hold multiple frames of reference with the attributes of empathy, lack of blame, in-depth knowledge, and access to joy. One of the things I really love about working interculturally, you can learn so much and you can meet so many lovely people. Yeah, we can create joy together. So this is for you to look at the big picture for all these positions. So take 30 seconds to read that. I will actually send you this presentation. I think we've got your email addresses. Can we do that, Lydia? Or shall we put that in here in the chat? Can we send people the presentation?
I think if we have the addresses, we can send, but please at least maybe put your address, those who wish to have the presentation, put your address in the chat. So like that, we save the chat and we will have contact with you. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm just going to finish here with a quote from Rumi. So your task is not to seek for love, but merely seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you built against it. And maybe that is me being naive. Just turn it off. Maybe that's me being an idealist. And, I do ask myself, what would that mean if I felt love for the world? If I can be responsible, if I can really embrace the idea of unity, that this is not okay for some people to live in poverty while other people are in excess. What does it mean to be in full contact with the world? So that's the question I'm going to leave you with. And do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put the presentation here. We've got 2 minutes. So I'm going to put the presentation here and you can download it straight away.